Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, everyone, just to echo what Stephen said, for making the trek here to Syracuse. It's really a pleasure and an honor to welcome you all to this wonderful region of the world. I'm going to keep my comments very short and just a few operational notes. This is intended to be a very discussion-oriented event. After each session, there's going to be a dedicated period of discussion and Q&A. For every session, every speaker, we're going to hold questions until that discussion period. So if you have a burning question that you want to make sure that you don't forget, there's a QR code here on the side. If you take a picture of that with your phone, that is a path to submit a question that the moderator will then have access to, and then they'll go through that in parallel with the questions that anyone might have. If you have a question during that period, there's microphones here at the stage, or just raise your hand and shout. We're a small group. We're pretty friendly. But as Stephen iterated, the point of this meeting is to facilitate discussions, highlight challenges, and try to come together as a community to further the goal of achieving dengue control around the world. And to kind of set the tone today and to get the conversation started, we're going to be first hearing from Jeremy Farrar from the WHO. He is one of the victims of the travel situation, so he will be presenting a recorded conversation. If you have questions, we'll pepper him by email, and then that'll be followed by Laura Adams from the CDC. So to get the conversation started, we're a pleasure to digitally welcome Jeremy Farrar to Syracuse.
I'm delighted to be here. My name is Jeremy Farrar, now Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. I'm really sorry I can't make it to join you in person. I hope I still get an invitation for next year, but I'm afraid the End Dengue program, World and with Dengue Control, was competing with Family Holiday in Kefalonia, Greece, and I'm afraid even as important as this meeting was, it couldn't compete with the holiday in Greece, I'm afraid. So, but I hope I get an invitation to next year, and I'll send my holiday dates on in advance, so maybe we can work things out. It is a great pleasure to join. There's a lot of good friends at the meeting, colleagues from many, many years, and actually also I think this is an incredibly exciting time in dengue generally. The fruits of science over the last 20, 30, 40 years and longer have now moved to being able to deploy them to control dengue at a global level and improve the lives of people all over the world. So it is an incredible time to be in the world of dengue, I think, and congratulations to everybody who's been involved. It's taken many years, but now is the hard part in a way, because it's translating that science that has been developed over decades into making a difference to people's lives, and maybe that's what I wanted to focus on for a few minutes at the meeting. In many ways, and many of those of you in the room and us here have argued for many years that actually dengue represents one of the challenges of the 21st century. The drivers of why we're seeing dengue expanding so much geographically around the world is because many of the underlying causes are what is driving the dengue explosion globally. And those issues are going to be present, sadly, in some ways, throughout the 21st century. So that is the world we live in. And of course, dengue, in some ways, is the poster child of the changes that we're seeing globally in areas beyond the health arena. So climate change, biodiversity loss, the ability of the Aedes mosquito to adapt to urban populations, the density of those urban populations, and of course trade and travel has meant that the mosquito, and therefore the dengue virus itself, has now expanded to an extraordinary number of countries and regions across the world, and will continue to do so, because dengue in a way is the symptom of those broader issues that are driving the 21st century. And although we hope there will be progress on issues such as climate change, we hope there'll be progress on better urban planning and urban development, but the reality is that we're going to see continued impacts of climate, of humidity, of urbanisation, and of course trade and travel in the coming years, and population expansion, particularly in dense urban cities, which is, of course, is where the dengue mosquito most habitat is. What that means is we're seeing now the expansion of dengue into new populations. And as dengue expands into new populations, whether one serotype, 2, 3 or 4, and those obviously will evolve over time, we're seeing the epidemiology and the clinical being consistent in some ways, but also different in other ways. Age profiles are different, other conditions that people suffer from, multimorbidity, cardiovascular disease, and other conditions are complicating the epidemiology and the clinical picture of dengue as it expands, and therefore there is a constant need to keep up not with dengue as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, but what dengue is going to be in the future. There has been, and the people in this meeting have largely led this, there has been phenomenal progress, and it is important in a complex geopolitical world where there are a lot of cynical people and there's a lot of anger, and there are huge challenges globally, geopolitically, and in other ways at the moment. But it is also important to acknowledge that science has made quite phenomenal progress. I think many of us who were involved in this, say, at the end of the last century, beginning of this century, if you'd said to us 20 odd years ago of the progress that would have been made in the science underpinning dengue, I think we would have, even optimists amongst us, would have been surprised at the speed and the quality of that work, and that's a tribute to everybody who's in this meeting. Advances on understanding epidemiology, advances on understanding virology and the interplay between 4 serotypes, the advances in understanding pathogenesis, huge advances in improving clinical care in settings where there is great experience. Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Brazil, where clinical experience has guided much better clinical management and therefore reduced morbidity and mortality associated with dengue. The interplay between discovery science and clinical science and epidemiology and public health, I think, has made enormous progress. In diagnostics, the coming of better and more available rapid tests that can be used at the bedside both to rule dengue in and to rule dengue out. Again, all of these are improving along with molecular diagnostics to identify serotypes and other things. Vaccines. Vaccines have had a checkered history, and we all know that. But in 2024, when we have more than one vaccine available today, with proven efficacy in phase 3 trials, and we know there will be further vaccines coming down the track as a result of that investment over many, many decades in discovery science, now being translated through clinical translational pathways, phase 2 and phase 3 trials, and also the ability to manufacture these vaccines in the future in more distributed regional manufacturing bases, including in Brazil, one would hope in the future in other parts of Asia and indeed in Africa in the future. But we are lagging in some other areas, and I think the area that I would call out that we are still lagging in is the development not of the clinical management in terms of fluid balance, which I think has got a lot better, but in terms of therapeutics. I still haven't given up on the thought that there would be therapeutics, drugs, that could either prevent dengue and or treat dengue once it is established early in its course or indeed later in its course. If we look what happened during COVID in therapeutics, the rediscovery of drugs that could modulate the immune function in an acute viral infection, and indeed some progress in the antiviral drugs, I don't think we should give up on the ability to make therapeutics for dengue and then for health systems to adapt to either antiviral drugs or immune modulatory drugs. And for me, having seen the progress in pathogenesis, seen the progress in epidemiology, seen the progress in the mosquitoes, control with Wolbachia and gene editing, and seen progress in the vaccines. So one area which I think still deserves attention and which lags behind is antiviral drug discovery and its utilisation in health systems. And I would encourage, I think, all of us to consider thinking about that. The other reason for that is because I think we will, over the next decade, have to work out how we're going to use imperfect interventions in a collective way rather than seeing magic bullets which will answer all of the problems. Actually, I think this is true in malaria with the coming of great but imperfect malaria vaccines, which have to be integrated into complex malaria national control programs. We will see it, I think, in the next 5 years in tuberculosis as we have TB vaccines, but nevertheless they will not be perfect, they will not be 100% efficacious, and we will need to integrate those vaccines alongside better diagnostics and better treatment and epidemiological control. I think that is the future we're going to see in dengue as well, where instead of thinking there is a magic bullet, whether it's Wolbachia, gene editing, or vaccination, or control through traditional mosquito control measures, we are still going to see large communities and populations affected with dengue, severe dengue as well as mild, and the impact that has on communities. And therefore, I think rethinking how we see these complex diseases and think how we can integrate all of the science that we have to bear in an integrated package, rather than seeing magic bullets that will be the answer to everything, I think is something we're going to have to learn to do in science as well, where we're used to working in vertical structures. I think if we can do that, and we can develop the early diagnostics, we can develop the traditional ways of controlling the mosquito, we can integrate Wolbachia and maybe gene drives in future, and we have vaccines and we have therapeutics, then I think we have the capacity holistically to be able to control dengue globally. That is a huge challenge. We've had the traditional base of dengue in Southeast Asia, of course, and then increasingly in Central and South America. I would predict, and I think this is already happening, we will have huge issues of dengue in, yes, Southern Europe, Southern United States, as a result of climate change and urbanization, but also, and I think very concerningly, I think we're likely to see major outbreaks, as we saw recently in Burkina Faso, in Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in the Middle East region. The impact of dengue, with the impact it has on health systems, with the burden of disease of people that needed to be treated with very carefully controlled treatment, which we know is labour intensive for nurses and doctors in clinical facilities, the impact of that on already stretched health systems in Africa would be profound. And that, I think, is the future we need to prepare for. The challenge there, of course, in Southern Europe, in North America, and indeed in Sub-Saharan Africa, is we will have to see whether vaccines being used in a population which are naive to previous infection is actually the best way to go in the populations where there has not been endemic dengue and where seroconversion rates remain low, even in young teenagers and young adults. How we can deploy those vaccines in those situations, I think, is going to be critical. And I suspect it's going to require an integrated approach of triage, clinical care, epidemiology, mosquito control, and vaccines where they're appropriate. And so what my plea, I suppose, would be that instead of all of us seeing our little bit of the dengue program, whether it be a vaccine or treatment or clinical care or mosquito control, that increasingly meetings like this are where we come together and realise that we need to integrate all of these if we are truly going to use the science that has been developed in the last 20 years to ensure that dengue can be controlled. We are starting to have the tools. We need to make sure those tools are integrated together rather than seen as magic bullets in isolation. Very best wishes for the meeting. I'm sorry that you were competing with Greece and a family holiday. I hope I get invited next year, Stephen, and I will certainly make sure it's in the diary if the invitation comes. And I look forward to hearing more about the meeting and working how we can all work together to make what we all want to be true, which is dengue control globally. Thank you.